Hello everyone, I am the Jack-bound sleep story and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching now? Get comfortable and relax. I never thought a baby stroller could be the beginning of a nightmare. But as I huddled in my darkened apartment listening to the sound of someone trying to pick the lock on my front door, I realized how wrong I'd been. It all started 2 weeks ago. I just moved to Chicago with my 6-month-old daughter Emma. Money was tight and I needed a stroller. New ones were way out of my budget, so I turned to Craigslist. After scrolling through countless listings, I found one that looked perfect, a gently used UPAB baby cruise, half the retail price. The seller, Susan, lived just a few neighborhoods over. I messaged her and we arranged to meet at her apartment the next day. As I drove there, Emma sing in her car seat. I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. I'd never bought anything off Craigslist before, but surely it would be fine. It was just a stroller. After all, Susan's apartment was in a part of town I wasn't familiar with. The buildings were older, paint peeling with bars on the windows. I double-checked the address, took a deep breath and knocked on the door. A woman in her mid-30s answered, smiling warmly. "You must be Anna," she said. "Come on in, I'm Susan." I hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside holding Emma. Closed. The apartment was cluttered but clean, toys scattered across the floor. A toddler peered at us from behind the couch. "That's my little one, Zoe," Susan said, gesturing to the child. "She just turned 3. They grow up so fast, don't they?" I nodded, relaxing a bit. "They really do. Emma here is already 6 months. I can hardly believe it." Susan led me to the living room where the stroller stood. It looked even better than in the photos. Barely a scratch on it. As I examined it, Susan chatted about her kids, asked me questions about Emma. It felt normal, nice. Even after a bit of small talk and a test run pushing the stroller around the apartment, I handed over the cash. Susan helped me carry it down to my car. "Drive safe," she said as I strapped Emma in. "There are some crazy drivers out there." I waved goodbye, feeling pleased with my purchase. It wasn't until I was halfway home that I realized how odd that last comment had been. How did she know which direction I was going? I shook off the thought I was being paranoid. Susan was just being friendly, that's all. The next few days were uneventful. The stroller worked perfectly and I started to forget about the slightly strange interaction with Susan. But then on day 4 I noticed something odd. I was walking Emma to the park when I saw a car parked across the street. It was a nondescript sedan, dark blue or black. What caught my attention was the driver. He seemed to be watching me. When I looked directly at him, he quickly turned away. I picked up my pace, heart beating a little faster. At the park, I kept glancing around, but the car was nowhere to be seen. I told myself I was imagining things, but the next day I saw it again. Same car, same spot. This time when I looked, the driver didn't look away. He just stared, his expression unreadable behind dark sunglasses. I hurried back home, pushing the stroller faster than usual and started to fuss, picking up on my anxiety. As soon as I got inside, I locked the door and called my best friend. "Lisa, am I going crazy?" I asked after explaining the situation. "Maybe I'm just sleep deprived and seeing things." Lisa's voice was concerned. "I don't think you're crazy, Anna. That definitely sounds creepy. Have you seen the car any other times?" I thought back. Now that you mention it, I think I might have. I didn't pay much attention before, but a chill ran down my spine. "Oh God, Lisa, what if they've been following me this whole time. Okay, let's not panic, Lisa said. Though I could hear the worry in her voice, it could still be a coincidence. But just in case, maybe you should vary your routine for a few days, see if anything changes. I agree, Reed, and we made plans for Lisa to come over that weekend. After hanging up, I went to check on Emma. She was sleeping peacefully in her crib, unaware of her mother's growing fear. The next day, instead of our usual morning walk, I drove to a coffee shop in a different neighborhood. As I sat by the window sipping my latte and watching Emma babble in her stroller, I started to relax. Maybe I had been overreacting. Then I saw it. The car, it was parked across the street, half hidden behind a delivery truck. My hand started to shake, causing my coffee to SOS over the rim of the cup. I grabbed my phone, ready to call Lisa or the police or anyone, but as I looked back up, the car was pulling away. I caught a glimpse of the driver. It was a man different from the one I'd seen before. That night I barely slept. Every noise made me jump. Was that a car door closing? Outside, footsteps on the stairs. I checked the locks a dozen times, pulled the curtains tight, and kept Emma's crib right next to my bed. In the morning, blurry-eyed and exhausted, I made a decision. I needed to know what was going on. I called in sick to work and asked my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, to watch Emma for a few hours. Are you sure you're all right, dear? Mrs. Chen asked as I handed Emma over. You look terrible. I forced a smile. Just a little under the weather. I'm going to see the doctor instead. I drove to Susan's apartment. I didn't have a plan exactly. I just knew I needed answers, and this was where it had all started. As I parked across the street, I saw Susan coming out of her building. She was alone, no sign of her daughter. I slouched down in my seat, watching as she got into a car, the same dark sedan I'd been seeing everywhere. My heart pounded as I followed her. She drove to a rundown strip mall on the outskirts of the city. As she got out of her car, a man approached her. They talked for a few minutes, their body language tense. Then Susan handed him an envelope and he gave her a small package in return. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Was Susan involved in something illegal, and what did it have to do with me? I was so focused on Susan and the man that I didn't notice another car pulling up behind me until it was too late. A sharp tap on my window made me jump. A man with a hard face and cold eyes gestured for me to roll down the window. My hands shaking, I complied. Is there a problem, officer? I asked, though I was pretty sure he wasn't a cop. Get out of the car, he said, his voice low and threatening. I considered making a run for it, but where would I go? Slowly, I opened the door and stepped out. The man grabbed my arm, his grip painfully tight. You just couldn't leave well enough alone, could you? He growled. You had to go poking around. He started dragging me toward Susan's car. She was watching, her face a mask of guilt and fear. Please, I begged. I don't know what's going on. I have a baby at home. Please, just let me go. The man's grip tightened. Shut up, you're coming with us. Suddenly, the sound of sirens filled the air. Police cars swarmed into the parking lot. Officers jumping out with guns drawn. Police. Freeze. Everything happened so fast after that the man tried to run but was tackled by an officer. Susan burst into tears, falling to her knees with her hands up. I stood there shaking as an officer approached me. Are you Anna Thompson? He asked. When I nodded, he continued, we've been investigating this group for months. Your friend Lisa called us when you didn't return her calls. She was worried. I let out a sob of relief. Lisa, my wonderful, paranoid, life-saving best friend. Over the next few hours, I Learned the truth: Susan was part of a criminal ring that used Craigslist to find targets for burglary and identity theft. The stroller had been bugged with a GPS tracker. They'd been following me, learning my routine, planning to rob me. As I sat in the police station giving my statement, all I could think about was Emma, my beautiful innocent daughter who had unknowingly been in danger this whole time. When I finally got home, I hugged Emma so tight she started to squirm. Mrs. Chan hovered anxiously, full of questions I wasn't ready to answer. That night, as Emma slept peacefully in her crib, I sat by the window jumping at every sound. The police had assured me it was over, that everyone involved had been arrested, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I looked at the stroller still sitting in the corner of the room. Tomorrow I would get rid of it, buy a new one, even if I had to max out my credit card. But for now, in the quiet of the night, I allowed myself to cry for the fear I'd felt, for the trust I'd lost, and for the realization that sometimes the most ordinary things can lead us into extraordinary danger. As I wiped my eyes, I made a promise to myself and to Emma. I would be more careful, yes, but I wouldn't let fear rule our lives. We had survived, and we would be stronger. I never thought I'd find hell in paradise, but as I crouched in the darkness listening to the voices of killers, I realized how quickly heaven could turn into a nightmare. It was supposed to be a simple hiking trip, a chance to clear my head after a messy breakup and the stress of city life. I'd always loved the outdoors, the peace and quiet of nature, so when I found a trail in a remote part of the Rockies, it seemed perfect. 3 days of solitude, just me and the wilderness. The first day was everything I'd hoped for. The air was crisp and clean, the views breathtaking. I hiked until my legs ached, setting up camp as the sun began to set. As I sat by my small fire, watching the stars appear one by one, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't experienced in years. It was on the second day that everything changed. I'd been hiking for hours, the trail becoming less defined as I ventured deeper into the wilderness. The trees seemed to grow thicker, the underbrush more dense. I was considering turning back when I saw it, a small clearing ahead, and in it, what looked like an old cabin. Curiosity got the better of me. I approached cautiously, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of pine needles. The cabin was weather-beaten, its wood gray with age. But as I got closer, I noticed something odd. The padlock on the door looked new, shiny against the weathered wood. I told myself I should leave, continue on my hike, but something held me there. Maybe it was the mystery of it, or maybe just the need for some form of human connection after a day and a half alone in the woods. I circled the cabin, peering in through grimy windows. The interior was dark, but I could make out shapes of furniture, a table, some chairs. It looked lived in, not abandoned as I'd first thought. As the sun began to set, I decided to make camp nearby. I told myself it was just to rest, but deep down, I knew I was hoping to catch a glimpse of whoever used this isolated cabin. I set up my tent a little ways off, hidden in a thick stand of trees. As darkness fell, I doused my fire and settled in for the night, my ears straining for any sound. Hours passed. I was on the edge of sleep when I heard it, the low rumble of an engine. My eyes snapped open, suddenly wide awake. The sound grew louder, and then I saw headlights cutting through the trees. Heart pounding, I unzipped my tent just enough to peer out. A large pickup truck pulled into the clearing, its headlights illuminating the cabin. 3 men got out, their voices low but carrying in the still night air. "Did anyone follow you?" one asked, his tone sharp. "Nah, we're clear," another replied. "Let's get this stuff inside, quick." I watched, barely breathing, as they unloaded several large duffel bags from the truck. They moved with a sense of urgency, glancing around nervously as they worked. As they opened the cabin door, light spilled out, and I caught a glimpse of what was inside one of the bags. My blood ran cold. Guns, a lot of them. I eased back into my tent, my mind racing. What had I stumbled upon? Gun runners? Drug dealers? Whatever it was, I knew I was in way over my head. I needed to leave, to get as far away from here as possible. but I was trapped. My car was miles away, and in the darkness, with these men around, trying to hike out would be suicide. So I waited, every muscle tense, listening to the muffled voices from the cabin. Occasionally, I heard laughter, the clink of bottles. They were drinking, which somehow made it all even more terrifying. I must have dozed off at some point because the next thing I knew, sunlight was filtering through my tent. The clearing was quiet. Cautiously, I peeked out. The truck was gone. This was my chance. I started packing up my gear as quickly and quietly as I could. Just as I was about to leave, I heard voices again, but these were different, loud, angry. "I'm telling you, someone's been here," a voice shouted. "Look at these tracks." My heart stopped. In my haste to leave, I'd been careless. They'd seen signs of my camp. "Spread out," another voice commanded. "Find them." Panic surged through me. I abandoned my tent, grabbing only my backpack. I ran, no longer caring about noise, just needing to put distance between myself and the cabin. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face. I could hear them behind me, shouting to each other. They were gaining. My foot caught on a root, and I went down hard, tumbling down a small slope. Pain shot through my ankle as I tried to stand, sprained, maybe broken. I couldn't run. Desperately, I looked around. There, a few feet away, was a fallen tree, its roots creating a small cavity. It was my only chance. I dragged myself over, squeezing into the space. It was tight, dirt and rotting wood pressing in on all sides. I tried to control my breathing, each gasp sounding thunderous in my ears. Footsteps approached, crunching on leaves and twigs. "Where are you, you little rat?" a voice growled, terrifyingly close. I closed my eyes, willing myself to disappear. The footsteps circled my hiding spot once, twice. "Anything?" a voice called from a distance. "Nah," the man near me replied. "Trail goes cold here. Must have doubled back." "All right, regroup at the cabin. We need to move everything now." The footsteps receded. Still, I didn't move. I don't know how long I lay there, every sound making me flinch. Hours, maybe. When I finally gathered the courage to peek out, the forest was quiet. No voices, no footsteps, just the normal sounds of birds and wind in the trees. Slowly, painfully, I extracted myself from the hiding spot. My whole body ached, my ankle throbbing. I limped through the forest, only vaguely aware of which direction I was going. My only thought was to put as much distance as possible between myself and that cabin. As the day wore on, my pace slowed. My ankle was swollen, each step agony. The forest seemed to stretch on forever, trees blurring together in a green haze. Just as despair was starting to set in, I heard it, the faint sound of running water. A stream. And where there was a stream, there might be a trail. Hope giving me a second wind, I followed the sound. There it was, a small stream, and beside it, a narrow but clear trail. I wanted to cry with relief. I started down the trail, my steps a little lighter despite the pain. As I walked, I began to hear something else, voices. But these were different, light, cheerful, the sound of laughter. I rounded a bend, and there they were, a family, 2 parents and a couple of kids, setting up camp by the stream. They looked up as I approached, their smiles fading to concern as they took in my appearance. "Are you all right?" the father asked, already moving toward me. I opened my mouth to reply, but no words came out. Instead, to my horror and embarrassment, I burst into tears. The next few hours passed in a blur. The family, the Johnsons, were on a weekend camping trip. They gave me food, water, and first aid for my ankle. Mr. Johnson used a satellite phone to call for help. As we waited for the rangers to arrive, I told them a version of what happened, leaving out the parts about guns and being chased. I said I'd gotten lost and hurt my ankle. They were sympathetic, the kids wide-eyed at my adventure. When the rangers finally arrived, I was taken to a small clinic in the nearest town. As a paramedic checked my ankle, a police officer came to take my statement. This time, I told the whole story, the cabin, the men, the guns, the chase. The officer's face grew increasingly serious as I spoke. "You're lucky to be alive," he said when I finished. "We've been trying to track down this group for months. They're part of a large weapons smuggling operation." He asked me more questions, writing rapidly in his notebook. When he was done, he assured me they would investigate immediately. "We'll need you to stay in town for a few days," he said, "just until we can verify everything." I nodded, too exhausted to argue. As he left, a nurse came in with some painkillers. As they started to take effect, I felt myself drifting off. In my dreams, I was back in the forest, running from unseen pursuers. But this time, there was no hiding place, no fallen tree to crawl under. I woke with a start, my heart pounding. It took me a moment to remember where I was. The small clinic room was dark, moonlight streaming through the window. I was safe. But as I lay there, listening to the quiet beep of machines and the soft footsteps of nurses in the hallway, I knew something had changed. The forest, once a place of peace and refuge, now held a darker meaning. I thought about the hike I'd planned, the solitude I'd craved. It seemed naive now, almost laughable. In seeking to escape the complexities of city life, I'd stumbled into a nightmare far worse than anything I'd left behind. As I drifted back to sleep, one thought kept circling in my mind: sometimes the real dangers aren't in the world we're trying to escape but in the one we're running toward. And paradise, I'd learned, can hide the darkest secrets of all. The stench of copper hit me before I even opened the door. In that moment, I knew this wasn't going to be a routine welfare check, but nothing could have prepared me for the horror that awaited inside that isolated farmhouse. My name is Sarah, and I've been a social worker for over a decade. I've seen my fair share of difficult situations: abuse, neglect, poverty. But what I encountered that day shook me to my core. It started like any other case. A concerned neighbor had called, reporting that they hadn't seen the Johnson family in days. The Johnsons were a quiet bunch: mom, dad, and 2 kids. They lived on a small farm about an hour outside the city, keeping to themselves mostly. It wasn't unusual for rural families to go days without seeing neighbors, but something about this all felt different. As I drove down the long, dusty road leading to the farmhouse, an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. The usually picturesque countryside seemed ominous, shadows stretching long in the late afternoon sun. I tried to shake off the feeling, chalking it up to an overactive imagination. It started like any other case. A concerned neighbor had called, reporting that they hadn't seen the Johnson family in days. The Johnsons were a quiet bunch: mom, dad, and 2 kids. They lived on a small farm about an hour outside the city, keeping to themselves mostly. It wasn't unusual for rural families to go days without seeing neighbors, but something about this all felt different. As I drove down the long, dusty road leading to the farmhouse, an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. The usually picturesque countryside seemed ominous, shadows stretching long in the late afternoon sun. I tried to shake off the feeling, chalking it up to an overactive imagination. I pulled up to the house, gravel crunching under my tires. The place looked wrong: curtains drawn tight, no sign of the usual farm activity. The old pickup truck that was always parked out front was missing. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of my car. The air was thick and still, not even a breeze to rustle the overgrown grass. As I approached the porch, I noticed scratch marks on the front door, deep gouges in the wood, as if someone or something had been desperately trying to get in or out. I knocked, the sound echoing ominously. "Hello? Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, it's Sarah from Social Services. Just here for a check-in." No response. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. Protocol dictated that I should leave if no one answered, but something kept me there. Call it intuition or foolishness, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I tried the door handle. To my surprise, it turned easily. As the door swung open, that coppery smell hit me full force. I gagged, my hand flying to my mouth. "Hello?" I called out again, my voice shaky. "Is anyone home?" Silence greeted me, broken only by the creak of floorboards under my feet as I stepped inside. The interior of the house was dark, curtains drawn against the fading daylight. As my eyes adjusted, I saw signs of a struggle. A lamp shattered on the floor, a chair overturned. And then I saw the blood. It was everywhere, splattered across the walls, pooled on the hardwood floor. My heart raced, every instinct screaming at me to run. But I couldn't. If there was any chance someone was still alive, I had to find them. I moved deeper into the house, my shoes sticking slightly to the tacky floor. The living room was a disaster, furniture overturned, picture frames smashed. Whatever had happened here, it had been violent. As I approached the kitchen, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold, a soft whimper, barely audible. It was coming from upstairs. Hello? I called out louder now, trying to steady my voice. Is someone there? I'm here to help. Another whimper, slightly louder this time, confirmed that it was human. I made my way to the stairs, my hands shaking as I gripped the banister. Each step creaked under my weight, the sound impossibly loud in the silent house. At the top of the stairs, I paused. The blood trail continued, leading down the hallway to a closed door at the end. The whimpering was clearer now, punctuated by soft sobs. I approached the door slowly, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I'm coming in, I announced, my voice barely above a whisper. I turned the handle and pushed the door open. The room was dark, but I could make out a small figure huddled in the corner. As my eyes adjusted, I saw it was a child, a little girl, no more than 6 or 7. Hey there, I said softly, trying to keep my voice calm despite the terror coursing through me. My name's Sarah. I'm here to help. Are you hurt? The girl looked up, her wide eyes filled with fear. She was covered in blood, her blonde hair matted with it. But as I looked closer, I realized with relief that she didn't appear to be injured. The blood wasn't hers. I took a step toward her, and she flinched. It's okay, I soothed. I'm not going to hurt you. Can you tell me your name? Lucy, she stammered, her voice barely audible. My name is Lucy. Hi, Lucy, I said, kneeling down to her level. Can you tell me what happened? Where are your parents? At the mention of her parents, Lucy's face crumpled, and she began to sob in earnest, her small body shaking. I moved closer, fighting every instinct that was telling me to grab the child and run. It's okay, sweetie, I said, my voice as gentle as I could make it. You're safe now. Can you tell me where your parents are? Lucy pointed a trembling finger toward the closet. My gaze followed, and I noticed for the first time that the closet door was slightly ajar. A dark liquid was seeping out from under it, spreading across the carpet. My stomach lurched. I knew what I would find, but I had to be sure. Lucy, I said, my voice as steady as I could make it. I need you to close your eyes for me, okay? And keep them closed until I say it's all right to open them. Can you do that for me? She nodded, squeezing her eyes shut tight. I stood up on shaky legs and approached the closet. The smell was overwhelming now. I reached for the door handle, took a deep breath, and pulled it open. What I saw will haunt me for the rest of my days. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson were there, or what was left of them. Their bodies were mutilated beyond recognition. And there, huddled between them, was a little boy, Lucy's brother. His eyes were open, staring blankly. He'd been dead for days. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. I managed to close the door before I lost the contents of my stomach on the bedroom floor. As I wiped my mouth, my mind raced. What could have done this? It looked like an animal attack, but no animal I knew of could have caused this level of devastation. And how had Lucy survived? I turned back to the little girl, still huddled in the corner with her eyes squeezed shut. I needed to get her out of here, now. Lucy, I said, my voice hoarse. You can open your eyes now. We're going to leave, okay? I'm going to take you somewhere safe. She nodded, her eyes fluttering open. I held out my hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. As we made our way downstairs, I pulled out my phone to call the police. No signal, of course. We stepped outside, the fresh air a blessed relief from the horror inside. I led Lucy to my car, helping her into the back seat. As I closed the door, I heard something that made my heart stop, a low, guttural growl. I turned slowly, my eyes scanning the overgrown field beside the house. There, at the edge of the tall grass, I saw movement, something large, moving on all fours. In the fading light, I caught a glimpse of matted fur, long, sharp claws, and eyes glowing in the twilight, fixed directly on me. I didn't think. I didn't breathe. I just moved. I yanked open the driver's door, threw myself inside, and turned the key. The engine roared to life just as the creature burst from the grass, charging toward us. I slammed the car into reverse, tires spinning in the gravel. In the rearview mirror, I saw it gaining on us impossibly fast. Its jaws were open, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. We hit the road, and I shifted into drive, flooring the accelerator. The creature was right behind us, so close I could hear its claws scraping against the trunk. "Hold on, Lucy!" I shouted, swerving to try and shake it off. For miles, it chased us. Every time I thought we'd lost it, I'd catch a glimpse of it in the mirror, tireless, relentless. It wasn't until we hit the main road, other cars appearing around us, that it finally fell back. As we sped toward the city, lights appearing on the horizon, I allowed myself to breathe. Lucy was curled up in the back seat, silent. I glanced back at her, this tiny survivor of unimaginable horror. "It's okay," I said, trying to convince myself as much as her. "We're safe now." But as I drove through the night, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, I knew that wasn't true. We had escaped, yes. But safety? That was an illusion, shattered forever. Whatever that thing was, it was still out there. And as the adrenaline faded and the reality of what I'd seen began to sink in, I realized that my life and Lucy's would never be the same. The quiet countryside I'd driven through just hours ago now seemed full of shadows, of hidden dangers. I knew that from this night forward, every darkness would hold the potential for terror, every silence the promise of that bone-chilling growl. As we drove into the city, the familiar skyline offering little comfort, I made a silent vow. I would protect Lucy. I would find out what happened to her family. And somehow, someday, I would make sense of the nightmare we'd lived through. But deep down, I knew some horrors can't be explained. Some terrors don't end when the sun rises. And sometimes, the monsters that hide in the shadows are all too real. The day I stopped a child trafficking ring started like any other shift at the beach, but by sunset, I'd stared evil in the face and realized that monsters don't always hide in the shadows. Sometimes, they walk among us in broad daylight. My name is Mike, and I've been a lifeguard at Sunset Beach for 5 summers now. It's usually a pretty sweet gig of sun, sand, and the occasional heroic rescue to impress the ladies. But nothing in my training prepared me for what happened that scorching July afternoon. The day began normally enough. I climbed up to my perch on the lifeguard tower, slathered on sunscreen, and surveyed my domain. The beach was already packed, families staking out spots with colorful umbrellas and coolers, kids shrieking with laughter as they splashed in the shallows, while teenagers showed off on surfboards further out. Around midday, I noticed a group of men arrive. There were 4 of them, all in their late 30s or early 40s. Something about them seemed off from the get-go. They were dressed too nicely for the beach, button-up shirts and pressed khakis instead of swim trunks and tank tops. And unlike everyone else soaking up the sun, they huddled together in the shade of a large umbrella. At first, I tried to brush off my unease. Maybe they were just some businessmen on a lunch break, enjoying the view. But as the afternoon wore on, their behavior grew increasingly suspicious. They never went near the water or even took off their shoes. Instead, they sat rigid in their chairs, eyes constantly scanning the beach. Every so often, one would mutter something to the others, who'd nod gravely in response. But what really set off alarm bells was the way they watched the children. Their gazes followed kids as they ran past, lingering a bit too long. One man had a camera and seemed to be taking an awful lot of photos in the direction of the playground. Another kept checking his watch and muttering about being on schedule. A chill ran down my spine despite the sweltering heat. I'd seen my fair share of creeps on the beach before, but this felt different, more organized, more sinister. I radioed my supervisor, Jake, and shared my concerns. "Keep an eye on them," he advised. but don't engage unless you see them actually do something. We can't accuse people without proof. I nodded, but my gut twisted with unease. What if waiting for proof meant a child disappeared? As the afternoon progressed, the men's behavior grew bolder. They split up, each taking a different section of the beach. It was like they were creating a perimeter. One positioned himself near the snack bar, another by the restrooms, while the other two lingered near the main entrances. My heart raced as I realized what they were doing. They were cutting off escape routes. I scanned the beach frantically, looking for any kids who might be in immediate danger. That's when I spotted her, a little girl, maybe 6 or 7, building a sandcastle near the water's edge. She was just out of her mother's line of sight, who was distracted, chatting with a friend. And one of the men was walking straight toward her. Time seemed to slow down. I saw his lips move as he knelt beside her, pointing out toward the water as if showing her something. The girl smiled, nodding eagerly. He held out his hand. I didn't think, I just moved. I leaped down from my tower and sprinted across the sand, my whistle between my teeth. I blew it hard as I ran, the shrill sound cutting through the beach noise. "Hey!" I shouted as I neared them. "Step away from the child." The man's head snapped up, his eyes widening in surprise, then narrowing in anger. He dropped the girl's hand and bolted. I wanted to chase him, but the girl's safety came first. I skidded to a stop beside her as her mother came running over, alerted by my whistle. "What's going on?" she demanded, scooping up her daughter. "Ma'am, I need you to stay with your child and alert a staff member if you see that man again," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He may have been trying to abduct her. The color drained from her face as she clutched her daughter tighter. I didn't wait for a response, already scanning the beach for the other suspects. They were on the move, clearly realizing their cover was blown. I saw one making a beeline for the parking lot, while another was quickly packing up their belongings. I grabbed my radio. "Jake, it's Mike. Those men I told you about, they just tried to lure a child away. I think we're dealing with traffickers. We need to lock down the beach now." Jake's response was immediate. "Copy that. I'm calling the police. Don't approach them alone, Mike. These guys could be dangerous." But I was already running toward the parking lot, determination overriding caution. I couldn't let them get away, not when children's lives were at stake. I reached the lot just as one of the men was climbing into a dark SUV. Without thinking, I grabbed a beach umbrella from a nearby stand and hurled it like a javelin. It crashed through the SUV's back window, startling the man enough that he stalled the engine. I used those precious seconds to close the distance, yanking open the driver's side door. "Out of the car!" I yelled, grabbing his arm. He swung at me, his fist connecting with my jaw. Stars exploded in my vision, but adrenaline kept me upright. I tackled him, both of us tumbling onto the asphalt. We grappled there in the parking lot, trading blows. He was stronger than I expected, but I had youth and righteous anger on my side. I managed to pin him down just as sirens wailed in the distance. "It's over," I panted, tasting blood. "The cops are coming. You're done." His eyes blazed with hatred. "You have no idea what you've done," he spat. The police arrived moments later, quickly taking control of the situation. As they cuffed the man I'd subdued, I saw 2 of his accomplices being led away in handcuffs as well. The fourth, unfortunately, had managed to escape in the chaos. The next few hours passed in a blur of questioning and statements. The police praised my quick thinking but admonished me for putting myself in danger. I barely heard them, my mind reeling as the full impact of what had almost happened sank in. These men had been methodically planning to snatch children from right under our noses. How long had they been operating? How many kids had they already taken from other beaches, other towns? As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the now empty beach, a detective pulled me aside. "You did good work today, son," he said gravely. "We've been trying to crack this trafficking ring for months. Thanks to you, we finally got some solid leads." I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. "Those kids," I managed to ask. Will they be okay? The detective's expression softened. The ones here today? Yes, thanks to you. But there are others out there who still need saving. This is bigger than just one beach, I'm afraid. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I looked out over the darkening water, thinking of all the children who might be out there scared and alone. And I made a decision. How can I help? I asked, turning back to the detective. I want to do more. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. We could use someone with your instincts and dedication. It won't be easy, and it's sure as hell not as glamorous as being a lifeguard. But if you're serious, come down to the station tomorrow. We'll talk. That night, as I lay in bed replaying the day's events, I knew my life had changed irrevocably. The beach I'd loved, the job I'd enjoyed, they suddenly seemed trivial in the face of the darkness I'd glimpsed. I thought of that little girl, how close she'd come to being snatched away from everything she knew and loved. And I thought of all the other children out there who might not be as lucky. Sleep eluded me as I wrestled with the weight of my new knowledge. The world suddenly seemed a much darker, more dangerous place. But as I watched the first rays of dawn creep across my ceiling, I felt a steely resolve settle in my chest. I couldn't unsee what I'd witnessed. I couldn't unhear that man's chilling words. But I could use this experience, this anger and determination, to make a difference. As I got up to face the new day, I knew my time as a carefree lifeguard was over. A different kind of vigilance was needed now. The monsters were real, hiding in plain sight, and someone had to stand against them. Today, I'd stop being just a guardian of the beach. I'd become a guardian of innocence itself. And God help anyone who tried to harm a child on my watch again. I never thought a dusty old box would be the key to unlocking a world of danger and intrigue, but as I crouched in the shadows, listening to the voices of ruthless smugglers, I realized that some treasures are better left buried. My name is Dr. Amelia Carter, and I'm an archaeologist specializing in ancient Egyptian artifacts. I've spent years studying hieroglyphs and piecing together the mysteries of the past, but nothing in my studies could have prepared me for the heart-pounding adventure that began on a sweltering day in the Valley of the Kings. It was my third season working on a dig site near Luxor. The heat was oppressive, the sun beating down mercilessly as my team and I carefully excavated a promising area. We'd been at it for weeks, unearthing pottery shards and the occasional bit of jewelry, but nothing extraordinary. That all changed when my trowel hit something solid. Hey, guys, I called out, excitement bubbling in my voice. I think I found something. My colleagues gathered around as I carefully brushed away the sand. Slowly, the object began to take shape, a small wooden box, intricately carved with symbols I didn't recognize. Dr. Carter, my assistant Tom whispered in awe, this doesn't look like anything we've seen before. He was right. The box didn't fit with the time period we were excavating. It was older, much older, and far better preserved than it should have been. With trembling hands, I lifted the box from its resting place. It was surprisingly heavy for its size, and I could hear something shifting inside. Let's get this back to the lab, I said, cradling the box like a newborn. We need to document everything before we open it. Back at our makeshift lab, we carefully photographed and measured the box. The hieroglyphs were unlike any I'd seen before, a mixture of known symbols and completely foreign ones. It was maddening. I could almost understand it, but crucial pieces were missing. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the desert, we finally prepared to open the box. My heart raced as I carefully lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like silk, were several small artifacts: a golden scarab beetle, its eyes made of deep red gems, a set of small tools, their purpose unclear, and most intriguingly, a collection of papyrus scrolls, miraculously preserved. This is incredible, I breathed, carefully unrolling one of the scrolls. The writing was crisp and clear, as if it had been penned yesterday instead of thousands of years ago. This could change everything we know about ancient Egyptian culture. We worked late into the night, cataloging and photographing each item. It wasn't until the early hours of the morning that I finally collapsed into my cot, my mind whirling with the possibilities this discovery presented. The next few days were a blur of excitement and research. We kept the find under wraps, not wanting to alert the media until we had a better understanding of what we were dealing with. But as I delved deeper into translating the scrolls, a sense of unease began to grow. The text spoke of hidden temples, of rituals and powers that defied explanation, and, more worryingly, of a group dedicated to protecting these secrets at all costs. It was on the 5th night after our discovery that things took a dark turn. I was working late in the lab, poring over one of the scrolls, when I heard voices outside, angry voices, speaking in hushed tones. Curiosity got the better of me. I crept to the window, peeking out from behind the curtain. What I saw made my blood run cold. 2 men, dressed in dark clothes, were arguing with one of our local workers. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but their body language was clear, they were threatening him. I watched, heart pounding, as they pressed something into the worker's hand, money, I assumed, and then melted back into the shadows. Sleep eluded me that night. Who were those men? What did they want? A part of me hoped it was unrelated to our discovery, but deep down, I knew better. The next morning, I pulled Tom aside. "We need to be careful," I told him, recounting what I'd seen. "I think someone might be after the artifacts." Tom's face paled. "What do we do? Should we tell the authorities?" I shook my head. "Not yet. We don't know who we can trust. For now, let's just keep everything under tight security. Don't let anyone near the artifacts unless I'm present." Despite our precautions, the atmosphere at the dig site changed. I felt eyes on me constantly. Whispered conversations would stop abruptly when I approached. And then items started to go missing. Small things at first, a notebook here, a tool there, but it was enough to set me on edge. It all came to a head a week later. I was working late again, trying to decipher a particularly tricky passage in one of the scrolls. The lab was quiet, everyone else having retired for the night. A noise outside made me jump, footsteps, trying to be quiet but failing in the stillness of the night. I quickly turned off my lamp and ducked behind a large crate, my heart thundering in my chest. The door creaked open. 2 figures slipped inside, their faces obscured by the darkness. They moved with purpose, heading straight for the safe where we kept the artifacts. "Hurry up," one of them hissed. "We need to get this done before anyone notices." I watched in horror as they expertly cracked the safe, pulling out the box and its precious contents. They worked quickly, transferring everything into a backpack. I must have made a noise, a gasp, a shifting of my weight, because suddenly, one of them whirled around, peering into the darkness where I hid. "Someone's here," he growled. I didn't wait. I bolted, knocking over equipment in my haste to get to the door. Behind me, I heard shouts and the sound of pursuit. I ran into the night, the cool desert air whipping past me. I had no plan, no destination in mind, just an overwhelming need to get away, to protect the knowledge we'd uncovered. I don't know how long I ran. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but fear kept me going. Eventually, I found myself in a small copse of trees, an oasis in the desert. Collapsing behind a large rock, I tried to catch my breath and think. What could I do? Who could I trust? As if in answer to my unspoken questions, I heard the rumble of an approaching vehicle. Peering out from my hiding spot, I saw a jeep pull up. Tom jumped out, looking frantic. "Dr. Carter," he called out. "Are you here?" "It's me, Tom." "You're in danger." Relief flooded through me. I stumbled out from behind the rock. "Tom, thank God. They took the artifacts. We need to." My words died in my throat. Behind Tom, emerging from the jeep, were the 2 men I'd seen in the lab. Tom's face fell. "I'm so sorry, Dr. Carter," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "They have my family. I didn't have a choice." I backed away, my mind reeling with betrayal. But there was nowhere to run. The men approached, their expressions grim. "Dr. Carter," one of them said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "We don't want to hurt you, but you've stumbled onto something bigger than you can imagine. Something that needs to stay hidden." "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. We're keepers of an ancient secret, the other man replied. The artifacts you found, they're part of something dangerous, something that could upset the balance of the world if it fell into the wrong hands. I wanted to laugh. It sounded absurd, like something out of a movie. But the gravity in their eyes, the way Tom wouldn't meet my gaze, it made a horrifying kind of sense. What happens now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The first man sighed. Now you have a choice. You can come with us, learn the truth about what you've discovered, help us protect it. Or. He didn't need to finish the sentence. The implication was clear. I looked at Tom, at the artifacts peeking out of the backpack, at the vast desert around us. In that moment, I realized that the quiet life I'd known, the simple pursuit of knowledge, it was over. I took a deep breath. I'll come with you, I said. But I want answers. All of them. The men nodded, relief evident on their faces. As they led me to the jeep, I cast one last look at the dig site in the distance, the place where my old life had ended and a new, dangerous chapter had begun. As we drove off into the night, the box of artifacts secure between us, I couldn't help but wonder, had I uncovered the secrets of the past, or had I sealed my own fate? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain, the dusty world of archaeology would never be the same for me. I always thought I was a good judge of character. But on that rainy night, as the stranger in my passenger seat revealed his true nature, I realized how deadly wrong I could be. My name's Sarah, and I've been driving for a rideshare company for about a year now. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills and lets me meet all sorts of interesting people. At least, that's what I used to think before that fateful night. It was a Friday evening in late October, the kind of night where the rain comes down in sheets, turning the world into a blur of neon reflections and headlights. I'd been driving for hours, ferrying drunk college kids and weary office workers through the slick streets of downtown. I was just about to call it quits when my phone pinged with one last ride request. The pickup location was on the outskirts of town, near an old industrial park. Not the safest area, but the surge pricing was too good to pass up. Besides, I told myself, what were the odds of something bad happening on my very last ride? As I pulled up to the address, I saw a lone figure standing under a flickering streetlight. He was tall and lean, wearing a dark hoodie pulled low over his face. A small duffel bag was slung over his shoulder. I hesitated for a moment, my instincts screaming at me to drive away. But then I remembered all the times I'd been judged unfairly based on my appearance. Who was I to do the same to this guy? I unlocked the doors, and he slid into the back seat, bringing with him the smell of rain and something else I couldn't quite place. Thanks for stopping, he said, his voice low and gravelly. Not many people would pick up a guy like me in this part of town. I forced a smile, meeting his eyes in the rearview mirror. They were dark and intense, sending a shiver down my spine. No problem, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Where to? He gave me an address about an hour outside of town. It was way out of my usual area, but the fare would be substantial. I punched it into my GPS and pulled away from the curb. For the first few minutes, we drove in silence, the only sounds the rhythmic swish of the wipers and the patter of rain on the roof. I tried to focus on the road, but I could feel his eyes on me, watching my every move. So, I said, desperate to break the tension. What brings you out to the middle of nowhere on a night like this? He was quiet for so long I thought he hadn't heard me. When he finally spoke, his words sent ice through my veins. I'm running from something, he said. Something bad. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. Oh? I managed to squeak out. Like what? He leaned forward, his breath hot on my ear. The police, he whispered. I've done something terrible, and they're after me. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. I tried to keep my voice calm. What did you do? He sat back, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Why don't you pull over, and I'll show you? Every instinct I had was screaming at me to floor it, to get as far away from this man as possible. But we were on a deserted stretch of highway, trees looming on either side. There was nowhere to go. I I don't think that's a good idea, I stammered. Maybe I should just take you to your destination. His hand shot out, gripping my shoulder with surprising strength. Pull over. Now. I did as he said, easing the car onto the muddy shoulder. As soon as we stopped, he was out of the car, moving around to my door. I fumbled with the lock, but he was faster, yanking the door open and dragging me out into the rain. I stumbled, falling to my knees in the mud. When I looked up, he was standing over me, a wicked-looking knife glinting in his hand. Please, I begged, rain and tears mingling on my face. You don't have to do this. He crouched down, bringing the knife close to my cheek. Oh, but I do, he said, almost tenderly. You see, I can't have any witnesses. And you, my dear, have seen far too much. I closed my eyes, waiting for the bite of the blade. But instead, I heard a sound that made my eyes fly open in shock. Laughter. The man was laughing deep, belly laughs that shook his whole body. And then, to my utter disbelief, he helped me to my feet. Oh, man, he said, wiping tears from his eyes. You should see your face right now. Priceless. I stared at him, my mind struggling to process what was happening. What's going on? He grinned, all traces of menace gone from his face. It's a prank, sweetheart. For my YouTube channel. See? He pointed to a small camera attached to his hoodie. You've been punked. Relief washed over me, quickly followed by anger. Are you kidding me? I shouted, shoving him hard. You scared me half to death. What is wrong with you? His grin faltered. Hey, come on. It's just a joke. People love this stuff online. I was about to lay into him further when a new sound cut through the night sirens, growing closer by the second. The man's face drained of color. Oh, shit, he muttered. Someone must have seen us and called the cops. We gotta go. But I stood my ground. No, I said firmly. I'm not going anywhere with you. You can explain your little prank to the police yourself. His expression hardened. I'm not asking, he growled, grabbing my arm. The menace was back in his voice, and this time I knew it wasn't an act. Before I could react, he tightened his grip on my arm, yanking me toward the car. His earlier demeanor, the smug, jokester attitude, was gone, replaced by something darker, more dangerous. Get in the car, he hissed, his eyes darting toward the flashing lights that were now visible through the rain-soaked trees. No! I shouted, digging my heels into the muddy ground. Panic surged through me as I struggled against his iron grip. The sound of sirens grew louder, and I realized this was my chance. If I could hold out just a little longer, the police would arrive. I clawed at his hand, screaming at the top of my lungs. Help! Somebody, help me! He cursed under his breath, glancing nervously at the approaching lights. For a moment, I thought he might run, but instead, he shoved me hard, sending me sprawling into the mud. Fine, he spat. Stay here and explain this mess to the cops. He bolted toward the trees, disappearing into the darkness just as two police cruisers skidded to a stop on the side of the road. Ma'am, are you all right? One of the officers shouted as he jumped out of his car, his flashlight cutting through the rain. I pushed myself up, trembling and covered in mud. He tried to kidnap me, I managed to say, pointing toward the trees. He ran that way. Two officers took off in pursuit, their flashlights bobbing in the darkness. The remaining officer stayed with me, guiding me to his cruiser and wrapping me in a blanket. You're safe now, he said gently, his eyes scanning me for injuries. Can you tell me what happened? Through chattering teeth, I recounted the night's events, the pickup, the terrifying prank, and the moment it all turned real. As I spoke, his expression grew more serious. Do you know who he is? He asked. I shook my head. No, but he mentioned filming for a YouTube channel. There might be footage on his camera. The officer nodded, making a note. We'll look into that. For now, let's get you somewhere safe. The other officers returned a short while later, shaking their heads. He's gone, one of them reported. But we'll set up a perimeter and call in search teams. He won't get far in this weather. They drove me to the station, where I filed a detailed report. True to their word, they reviewed the footage on the small camera he'd left behind. The video showed everything: the initial pickup, his threatening act, and even the moment he pushed me into the mud. "This guy's more than just a prankster," one of the detectives said grimly. "We've had reports of similar incidents in nearby towns. He's escalating." Hearing that sent a fresh wave of fear through me. "Do you think he'll come after me?" I asked, my voice trembling. The detective shook his head. "We'll assign officers to patrol your neighborhood, just in case. But with the footage we have, it's only a matter of time before we catch him." I nodded, though the reassurance did little to calm my nerves. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I left the house, I found myself glancing over my shoulder, searching for a shadow in the distance or a figure lurking in the rain. It took weeks before the police called with an update. They tracked the man down to a motel in a nearby city. He was arrested without incident, and when they searched his room, they found evidence linking him to multiple cases of harassment and assault. "You were lucky," the detective told me. "It seems like he was testing boundaries, seeing how far he could push. If we hadn't caught him, who knows what he might have done next?" The relief I felt was overwhelming, but it was tempered by a lingering unease. Even with him behind bars, I couldn't forget the fear I'd felt that night, the helplessness of being at someone else's mercy. I quit driving for the rideshare company shortly after. It wasn't worth the risk, no matter how good the money was. But the experience left its mark. Every time I hear the patter of rain on the roof or the hum of tires on a wet road, I'm back on that highway, staring into the eyes of a stranger who smiled as he wielded a knife. And I remind myself that danger doesn't always look like a monster in the dark. Sometimes, it's the friendly face in your rearview mirror, hiding a secret you'll only discover when it's too late. The silence of the house was suffocating. As I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the glass of water in front of me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. It had been 2 months since I moved into this old house, a Victorian fixer-upper on the edge of town. The price was too good to pass up, even if the place had a reputation. The locals whispered about it, stories of strange noises, flickering lights, and the occasional scream in the dead of night. But I wasn't the superstitious type, and I needed a fresh start after the divorce. At first, everything seemed fine. The house was drafty, sure, and the floors creaked like they had a life of their own, but it was nothing out of the ordinary for a home this old. I spent my days painting walls, fixing leaky faucets, and sanding down the warped banister. It wasn't until the third week that things started to happen. It began subtly. Lights turning off by themselves, objects not being where I'd left them, and the faint sound of footsteps when I was sure I was alone. I chalked it up to my own forgetfulness and the quirks of an aging house. But then came the voice. I was in the living room, unpacking a box of books, when I heard it, a faint whisper, so soft I almost missed it. "Get out." I froze, my hands trembling as I clutched the book in my lap. "Hello?" I called out, my voice wavering. Silence. I shook my head, laughing nervously. "Great," I muttered to myself. "Now I'm imagining things." But as the days passed, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They didn't come from one direction but seemed to echo from every corner of the house. "Leave. You don't belong here. Run." At night, the house came alive with sounds, the creak of footsteps on the stairs, the slam of a door, the faint sound of someone humming a melancholy tune. I barely slept, my nerves stretched thin as I jumped at every noise. One night, I decided I'd had enough. Armed with a flashlight and a baseball bat, I set out to confront whatever, or whoever, was tormenting me. The house was eerily silent as I moved from room to room, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice echoing through the empty halls. "If this is some kind of joke, it's not funny." I reached the basement door, which stood slightly ajar. A chill ran down my spine as I shone the